Europe, 1943. It's morning, 20 miles from the enemy. These are American men going to work. The morning fighter patrol. They're flying over Italy, and there are others like them flying over Burma, over the coast of Holland, over China, and over Germany in search of the enemy. Enemy planes. The odds are bad this morning, nearly 3-1. And the routine morning patrol goes on. They close the range to 3,500 feet. 3,000. 2,500. 2,000. The odds are still 3-1. But it's 3 Nazis spinning in flames to every one of ours. Routine morning patrol. They're good planes, and their pilots are good too.
Yesterday, I fulfilled one of my ambitions as a combat pilot. I got 1 airplane.
An American, far from home, fighting for his country and for the respect of his fellow Americans. This man, and men like him, have battled not just against enemies in the sky, but against ignorance and bigotry as well. It wasn't so long ago that these men were students in a university, workmen in a shipyard, just plain citizens from all over the United States. They changed jobs, they changed clothes. They took a train into the future. They didn't know what the future might hold, but many hoped they would be given the chance to fly and to fight. Their journey began in Alabama at a famous school called the Tuskegee Institute. Founded on July 4th, 1881, it has graduated many thousands into agriculture, into science, into industry. Tuskegee was the first school of its kind, and its founder, Booker T. Washington, was a pioneer who blazed a trail for others to follow. This man had a dream, and the dream became a reality. He lifted the veil of ignorance from his people and pointed the way to progress through education and industry. It was near this school that the United States government decided to build an airfield. At one time, this was just another farm in Alabama. More than trees had to be cleared away. There was also misunderstanding, distrust, and prejudice. It started as an idea, but ideas are powerful things, and before long there were fighter planes flying overhead. In place of swamp and yellow pine, there were hangars, repair shops, and barracks. Instead of patches of corn, concrete flight strips. But this was not enough. You can't make a fighter squadron out of concrete and aluminum and a can of paint. It takes men. A chemistry student, a welder, a shoe salesman must learn how to fly. A group of average Americans, strangers to one another, must become a team of fighting men. It's a different world flying among the clouds. A man has to learn his way around. It takes many weeks of work to make a fighter pilot, and a lot of that work is done on a hard wooden chair. A fighter pilot is a combination of mathematician and athlete, a scientist and a sharpshooter. He has to know what goes on inside his plane. He must understand how and why it works, so that man and machine may become one. He begins in a safe, slow plane, 2 wings instead of 1. He also flies many hours inside a closed room. In the morning, he may be flying a prescribed course over a sheet of paper, and in the afternoon, fly the same course above the clouds. He trains his muscles as well as his mind. He will use the same sense of balance and coordination in the skies above Tuskegee. This job of flying is never easy, and sometimes it's very tough. But he's learning how far, how high, and how fast he must go to meet and defeat the enemy. Pilotage, dead reckoning, theory of flight, radio code. The information comes together and provides the foundation for flight. Above the hills of Alabama, men learn to fly in the tight combat formations they will someday use in aerial combat. So here was the answer to Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito. Here was the answer to the propaganda of the Japanese and the Nazis. Here was the answer to all who would oppress and persecute. There was the answer. The pilots of Tuskegee Airfield. Squadron after squadron came out of Tuskegee, flying P-40s first, tough little planes, then striking with Thunderbolts, P-47s, and on to P-51 Mustangs. It was never easy for these men. They were pioneers, and no pioneer has it easy. They fought lies, they fought heartbreak, and won the opportunity to fight the enemy above his own soil. They fought the enemy, but not without loss. Out of the first class to graduate, only a handful survived. In the first 3 years of Tuskegee Airfield, 750 pilots were trained. 50% of those saw combat. On its third anniversary, Major General Butler spoke of the first graduates.
Here, for the first time, Negro aviation cadets were being groomed to fly warplanes of a unit which was then a unit in thought only, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. These men were pioneers of a venture so new that you who stand here before me now, after 3 years, may still be considered forerunners in the movement which has given you a place in the fighting men of the sky.
Under the guidance of these men, new opportunities were sought and won for themselves and those who would follow. Standing behind these men were their families, their friends who expected so much of them. And backing them up were men and women of every creed and speech and color who believed in equality and justice. But it was the men of Tuskegee who faced the test and paid the price. There have never been in the course of time more inspiring words written than those that read, "All men are created equal." Sadly, for many who lived in America before the war, these same words proved a hollow promise, resounding as a mockery of equality that would demand years of struggle overshadowed by bitter disappointment. However, with the coming of the war, many African Americans saw an opportunity to establish their place in American society through service to their country. Bowing to the demands of major black organizations such as the NAACP, the National Urban League, and others, Congress made concession by passing Public Law 18. Under its directive, an air school to prepare blacks for military service was authorized. 91 of the 100 young Negro college students enrolled in the civilian pilot training program qualified for civil licenses during 1939 and 1940. In spite of all these facts, the Army Air Corps refused to alter its stand and allow blacks to fly. In 1941, with guidance from the NAACP, a Howard University student named Yancey Williams filed suit against the War Department to compel his admission to an air training center. Almost immediately, the War Department responded by announcing that it would establish an air unit near Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. Activated March 21, 1941, the Fighting 99th began training ground support troops at Chanute Field, Illinois. Eager young black Americans received specialized training in maintenance, engineering, armament, and communications. Just a few months later, an inaugural address was given at the Tuskegee Institute, initiating the training of black aviators for the United States Army Air Corps. This privilege brought with it a great responsibility. The nation was watching, and the fate of future black military aviation rested in the hands of these intrepid young flyers. In a bold and inspiring departure from business as usual, the contract for construction of the Tuskegee Army Airfield was awarded to the firm of McKissick & McKissick, headed by a black architect and engineer. In July, construction began on the facility for basic and advanced flight training. The first class for pilots consisted of 12 cadets and one military officer, Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. It commenced primary flight training July 19, 1941 at Moulton Field. Soon, young Tuskegee graduates would show the world they could not only fly, but fight. Shortly after graduating in the first class of 1942, Second Lieutenant Charles DeBow was stopped on the street by a white civilian and asked, "You one of those new colored flyers over at Tuskegee?" He proudly answered that he was. "Tell me one thing. What do you boys want to fly for anyhow?" he was asked. Shocked but not surprised, DeBow said that he couldn't really think of an adequate reply at the time, but afterward realized the simple eloquence of his answer. He was flying for his country. He felt he had a job to do for his country and his race, and just as Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver had proven themselves as educator and scientist, he might prove to someone that Negroes could become good pilots and officers. Armed only with their bravery and determination, fueled by dreams of dignity for others like themselves, Lieutenant DeBow and four of his fellow pioneers, Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., Second Lieutenant Lemuel O. Custis, Second Lieutenant George S. Roberts, and Second Lieutenant Mac Ross, became the first graduates, paving the way for the other 961 black military aviators who were trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield during World War II. Under the command of Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., 450 Tuskegee graduates flew as fighter pilots during World War II, serving with dignity and honor in the aerial wars over North Africa, Sicily, and Europe. Flying P-40s, P-39s, P-47s, and P-51s, the 99th Squadron grew into the 332nd Fighter Group, which included the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadron. Together, they flew 15,553 sorties and completed 1,578 missions with the 12th Tactical U.S. Army Air Force and the 15th Strategic U.S. Army Air Force. And with each and every mission, yet another victory was achieved, not just for the nation, but for a people as well. Years later, Colonel Davis would remark, "The interesting common fact that surrounded all of their backgrounds was that all of them had wanted to fly." Performance is the absolute key in combat. To protect the bombers, to prevent them from getting shot down by enemy fighters. The 99th Pursuit Squadron was expert in dropping bombs and hitting targets and locomotives. It was also expert in aerial combat. The 99th Squadron did one thing at Anzio that no other squadron did. It shot down 16 enemy airplanes. Though no real plans had been made for their usage, by mid-1943, Negro candidates were being screened to determine their relative aptitude as pilots for multi-engine aircraft, as well as bombardiers and navigators. Class 43J was the first at Tuskegee, with about half of its members training in the multi-engine Beechcraft AT-10, hoping that the bomb group program would actually develop. The first air cadets to train outside Tuskegee were the navigators who graduated at Hondo Field, Texas, February 26, 1944. The 477th Bombardment Group was officially activated January 15, 1944, at Selfridge Field. Although the war ended before the 477th saw combat, their struggle for equality and their performance as military professionals, along with the magnificent wartime record of the 99th and 332nd, led to a reversal of the U.S. War Department's racial policies. In 1946, Tuskegee Army Airfield closed. Shortly after its closing, the former base commander, Colonel Noel Parrish, in discussing the success of the flying school, said the following: "How good were our pilots? How good is any pilot? Our men were good enough to graduate from any flying school in the country. We made sure of that. And working together, we proved it. We emphasized that a pilot or a man, whatever color, size, or shape, is just as good as he proves himself to be. Men and pilots have to be considered as individuals. We've had some of the worst pilots in the world right here, and we have had some of the best." In the first place, they flew and fought as men. They may have had pretty good alibis for being failures if they wanted to use these alibis, or they may have been proud of their group as the only one like it in the world, as they had a right to be. But when the test came, they had to fly and fight just as men, Americans against a common enemy. Today, there are hundreds of thousands of black Americans serving in the United States Armed Forces. They are an integral part of the nation's defense. Their integration into the system, the opportunities it has provided, and the achievements it has allowed were all made possible through the efforts of that first group of men who were willing to stand up and fight against tyranny and oppression, both on the home front and on foreign shores.
hell with the accent light. Fight, 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 fight. 1999. Rat, 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 rat. Down in flames they go. Weathering fire the 99. Send them down below. We are the heroes of the night.
The men of the 99th Fighter Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group. Heroes.
Radio.